All right, it's father time here. This is something I've wanted to do for a long time for a number of reasons. I want to fly the P-51 from RAF Lashenden, which is in Kent. It's no longer an RAF base, but World War II was a P-51 base as of April 1944. Of course, D-Day was June 6, 1944. I wanted to fly it from RAF Lashenden, across the English Channel to Utah Beach, Omaha Beach, 2 landing occasions. We'll talk more about that. Gold Beach, Juneau, and Sword Beach, and return all the way to Lashenden. The RAF Lashenden is in 30 miles southeast of London. P-51s were flown in support of the bombers in the invasion on June 6, 1944. Invasion started at 6:30 in the morning. It's 6:09 right now. It changes like 6:20. June 6, 2023, but that would simulate the sunrise and sunset of 1944. And hopefully we'll be able to make it all the way back to Lashenden. The P-51, we'll talk more about that, but it was a replacement for the P-40 Warhawk and the Spitfire for long bomber escort and air paratrooper escort into for deep flights. It was based out of England, and it flown into it was then based out of France as the mainland was taken after D-Day. It's clear skies as it was on D-Day. Total 284 miles an hour, 31 flight. Hopefully we don't flame out, which I did the first time I tried this. I am not a historian, but I'll give you a bunch of D-Day facts off papers that I have. My father did land and moved up into the Ardennes forest and with General Patton's army and fought and to rescue the soldiers, Bradley's army in the Battle of the Bulge. Also, my mother-in-law's brother at 18 years old was unfortunately killed with General Patton's army during that same campaign with Patton. He was 18 years old, and he's buried at Luxembourg, same place General Patton is buried. So this D-Day and this area has a lot of meaning to me and my family. Hope you enjoy it. It's a long flight. I'm making it because my mother loves to study history, and as do I. Neither one of us is historians, but we're particularly interested in this, as I mentioned, because her father, my grandfather, landed at Normandy a few months after D-Day, moved up with General Patton's army to rescue the Bradley army, which was pinned down by the Germans in the Ardennes forest. Here we are at RAF Lashenden in Kent, New York. It's now a civilian field. It's only 4,000 feet of runway. Field elevation, it's only like 100 feet. Anyway, P-51 Mustang, beautiful airplane, ready to fly. Let's get some lights on in here. It's as the sun has yet to come up. Okay, I'm not a tail dragger expert. We're going to fly this bad boy out on this grass strip. Straight ahead into the darkness, head southeast, and we'll use the nav map to guide us over to Utah Beach. Of course, there were 6,000 aircraft launched for D-Day. Would have been quite an entourage going over there. Anyway, parking brake is off. I'm going to need a little bit of right brake, right aileron, and right rudder here. Bring the power up very slowly. As it gets moving, tap the right brake. This is the little tricks I'm learning here. Bring the power up very slowly. Short runway, so I can't bring it up too slowly. As I bring it to full power, there we go, we have full power. When the nose drops, bring a little backstick, little right aileron, so you don't dig the prop in. And you're not going to start flying this thing. We're really heavy. We're max gross weight on a short runway. Here's 100 knots. Let's go airborne. Get the gear up. But the flaps, we're going to wait till we get around 130 because we are super heavy. Start bringing the flaps up. There we go. And we are airborne. Canopy's closed. You do not want to go very long at max power. You will fry the engine on these turbine piston aircraft. All right. let's take a look at the cockpit here. Passing through 1,300 feet. This is in miles per hour, 170 miles per hour. It's about 150 knots right now, climbing out, heading about a 120, 130. Here's our attitude indicator wings level. And we're going through 210 miles per hour, 180 knots, 130 heading. Let's take a look at something here. If you go over to Navlog, I'm going to bring this over in front of us. They would have had something like this. So it says 197 heading initially for 323 miles. 33 minutes. Let's start the clock. Now that's based on airspeed that I'm not aware of what it is. Total flight, as I mentioned, is going to take about an hour 30. Move that off to the side. Here's the nav map. Move that in so you can see it. Of course, they wouldn't have had a nav map, right? So we're going to move over to the line, and we would be getting ready with our group of fighters over England to rendezvous somewhere with the bombers or the troop carriers to escort them in. The truth is, on D-Day, we're going to go over to about a 191 heading. On D-Day, the Allies had already pretty much accomplished air superiority against the Luftwaffe, and it was mostly against the guns and occasional Luftwaffe that was being launched, but tremendous luck. Now I have a little too much right rudder in here. Let me get the power back. Right now, let's take a look at the manifold pressure. You keep it up there 40. You see this oil temperature down here? That's going to get up over 100. You'll fry the engine. Big thing is down here. I've got to get from left to right about halfway through the flight. Try to get it trimmed up here in a minute. All right, so let's take a look at the nav map. Where is it? There's the course coming up there. Of course, now they were familiar with this area, so they would have known exactly which point to fly outbound over on the coast. And at that point, they could start their timing, so it'd be that much more accurate. But D-Day, the Germans thought it was going to be a bad day. In fact, it was a very nice day. So they weren't prepared. They also were expecting the invasion to come in this area. And the narrow point in Calais, when in fact it crushed way down in Normandy. So an element of surprise was there. All right, so we got our clock running. Let's get this bad boy trimmed up. Go down here. It wants to roll to the right. A little bit too much left rudder in. Let's try that. Still wants to roll to the right. You know, we've got to get out of max power here. Let's go to 30 manifold pressure. So this P-51, as I mentioned, the British wanted a replacement. They wanted more P-40 Warhawks, and the Americans said, well, we got another aircraft, this P-51 in production. This is around 1941. That is going to have a better range. P-40 Warhawk, American built, and the Spitfires just didn't have the range to escort the bombers and the troop carriers deep to the mainland. So, in fact, they did come up. The Americans did come up with this incredible 8,000 of these were built, incredible P-51 Alphas, and later on, the British added the Rolls-Royce engines to it, and this aircraft was able to escort the bombers deep into Europe, and then eventually they relocated our fighters and the British fighters, well, the British flew these as well, but over to France. So they didn't need as much range. Okay, so let's take a look. We're still rolling a little bit right, so a little bit of left rudder would do a wonderful thing. Let me take a look down here. Try that. A little better. Still a little bit of left. Let's go back in here. How about 2? Let's just go crazy. 2 on the rudder trim. Trim is everything, right? Now these P-51s could get up around 30,000 feet, so it could really escort the bombers, save a lot of gas too. Right now we're doing about 260 knots, around 280 miles per hour across the ground. Take a look around here. It's a beautiful airplane. Every pilot would love to fly this. All right, so we've drifted pretty far right of course. Let's get over onto our little map here. Everyone will be yelling at us by now, right? So where you go, my friend? So this is the line we want to be on right here. That white line is our return line as we make our way back to Lashenden, hopefully after a successful flight. When I hit the shore, I want to remember to come down here and change the tank to right from left. I ran out of gas last time, which was more than embarrassing. I just tried a little left rudder using a different control. You can see that didn't work out. So let's try a little more left rudder. I put the rudder bias a little left on this airplane in the sim, and I think it's confusing me. All right, so a little left rudder. Maybe I zeroed it out. So there's a preset condition you can do. Maybe 0, because I biased the rudder to the left already. Let's try that. Oh, that's flying a lot nicer. A lot nicer. Okay, there's the line up there. So what do we say, a 191? About a 191. And if you remember, our course was 197. So we'll do about a 197 on a course in 33 minutes. Oh, clock never started. All right, well, that's all right. We don't need it. The French coastline will be very obvious. We would have the benefit of having 6,000 aircraft out here with us. And here we go, close to that pink line. All right, if you would indulge me, I'm going to do, in my non-historian way, some D-Day numbers. Operation Overlord. There were 156,000 Allied troops. Of those, 73,000 were American, 61,700 were British, and 21,400 were Canadian. Supported by multiple nations, those were the three main participants on June 6, 1944. Out of the 61,700 British soldiers, 1,449 died in combat. Many, many more were casualties or injuries. The Americans out of 73,000 lost 2,499 soldiers. And the Canadians out of 21,400 lost 465 soldiers. And let's not even think about all of the injuries that occurred, lifetimes worth of injuries. Now, we talked about Utah Beach. The Americans landed on Utah and Omaha, which is to the right, straight ahead. We're going to cross those first. At Utah, 23,250 Americans landed. They were supposed to be supported by the paratroopers who, the day before it was cloudy, would drop behind enemy lines. But they were dropped off course, and the gun embankments and the defenses on the shore at Utah were not destroyed. And as a result, the paratroopers were left to try to reorganize behind enemy lines, and the beaches became a very dangerous place indeed. Omaha, they landed at two places the Americans did. Point to Hawk, which is very famous. That's where the gun encampments were. The Rangers scaled the wall, which was basically a cliff, to try to attack the guns. The guns remained in place and bombarded the ships and the beaches as the Americans were trapped down there. The bombers, because of the weather, missed their targets. Paratroopers were dropped again too far behind Omaha, Point to Hawk, and the guns were not taken out till much later the Germans fled with their guns, left, of course, the encampments in place. To today, the memorial camp is still there. I actually had a chance to visit that on a layover. I'm an airline pilot who retires in 2023, September of 2023, and on a Paris layover, a long one I did toward the beaches of Normandy. Very moving to me, especially since my grandfather had landed there. The bombing holes are still there. The French maintained it as a park, a memorial park, to honor the Allied invading troops, and the Americans took it over and took over the American cemetery that's just around Gold Beach. So we're going to fly over Utah Beach, Omaha, Point to Hawk, and Omaha Beach. Then we're going to fly over the British landing zone of Gold Beach. 25,000 British landed there. The Canadian landing zone of Juno Beach. 21,400 Canadians landed there. And then finally Sword Beach, the fifth beach. 28,884 British landed there. They were going to secure Pegasus Bridge, cut off supply lines. Paratroopers were dropped behind all these. It was so widely scattered, as we mentioned many times. Very ineffective, so we took a lot of casualties on the beach. D-Day in numbers. Listen to this. There were ships, 6,939 Allied vessels delivering troops. 6,939. So right now we'd be flying over, and these waters would be littered with anything from battleships, troop carriers, cargo ships, everything. 156,000 Allied troops, 11,590 aircraft. Got this thing trimmed up pretty good now. Thank God. 11,590 Allied aircraft participated. They flew a total of 14,674 sorties. Bombers, troop carriers, gliders, parachute aircraft, of course fighters, as P-51, Spitfire, P-38, P-40 Warhawk, to name a few. What else we got? Who commanded this operation? Well, General Eisenhower is in charge of all the Allied troops. Still a little bit of right roll. Let me put a little bit more left rudder in. Yeah, I biased. When you do this, you can bias one. So I biased left rudder to give me a little more rudder authority, and maybe I did a little too much. I'll fix that next time. There we go. I'm tracking this line. We'd be following the fighters, the bombers, the troop carriers, everything on in. So General Eisenhower is in charge of all the Allied troops. Dempsey was in charge of the British Second Army, landing at Gold Beach and Sword Beach, of course, and also he was in charge of the Canadians at Juno. Of course, he was in charge well beyond the beach landing, well into Europe. And of course, General Bradley landed at Utah and Omaha, eventually worked his way up into the Ardennes Forest, where he was trapped by one last German assault. The Germans were trying to fight their way through the Ardennes in a blitzkrieg. Panzer divisions got cut off from behind. They were able to sever the logistics lines. The tanks ran out of gas, many of them. And Patton's army came to the rescue of Bradley's army in the Ardennes Forest. So this P-51, we're not flying at high altitude in the interest of getting there fast, because we're doing about 260 knots, around 290 miles per hour. It would have been up at higher altitudes with the bombers in an attempt to save gas, much more fuel efficient up there. I'm looking up here at my little pink line. I need to come a little right towards Utah Beach. Remember those beaches. Utah, Omaha were the American beaches. Gold and Sword were the British, and the Canadians landed at Juneau. Dempsey was in charge of the British and Canadian troops. Bradley in charge of the U.S. First Army, and Patton came in later. Patton was not happy about Bradley getting the troops, getting the invasion, but he did come to the rescue of Bradley. As I mentioned, my mother-in-law's brother Donald Ploss died at 18 years old in Luxembourg area. He's buried at Luxembourg Gardens with 2,500 other Americans, as well as General Patton. D-Day invasion began in the pre-dawn hours of June 6th. I'm going to read a little bit. Let me read to you. The D-Day invasion began in the pre-dawn hours of June 6th. So we've got the calendar set to June 6th here, albeit 2023. At the about 6 a.m., 6:30 in the morning, the first troops hit the beaches. They moved in the dark. Right now it's 6:40 local, so they would have been hitting the beaches right about now. With thousands of paratroopers landing inland on Utah and Sword beaches. Can we see those yet? Let me see. Probably. All right, this is Sword Beach. We're heading first over towards Utah Beach over here. You know what? Why don't we mix it up a little? This VFR map looks to be a little bit off. We're going to Sword first. Utah Beach is way over here. Sword is in here. This is the Omaha area, Utah, Omaha, Sword's up in here. We'll head over that way first. So this is Utah. Point to Hawk, these are the Omaha beaches. Gold, Juneau, Sword. And here we are way up here. Doing a right-hand turn. We're going to come in, we're going to strafe the beaches, take a look at that memorial with the crater holes. We'll fly over Sword, Juneau, Gold, Omaha, Utah, and head back. Hopefully get back to RAF Lashenden without running out of gas. Now, it's showing that we have 2/3 of a tank, and if you look in the cockpit, at the fuel gauge, it's fuel temperature. Hydraulic pressure, coolant, fuel. RPMs are good. We're not going to burn anything out. I think the fuel is pretty much done on feel. I don't really see any fuel gauges around here. I'm sure somebody knows where it is, but I don't see it. All right, let's see how we're doing on the map. There it is. This is Sword, Gold, head on over. So I think I have a pretty good idea where we are now. That is France over there. Off to the right would have been, way back there would have been Calais, Holland. This is the French coast. As you can see, a much wider part of the ocean. I did a pretty good job of trimming this guy up this time. Yeah, last time I filmed this, I tried it once before, and I ran out of gas. Couldn't get it started. In fact, the sim froze up and I had no controls, and into the water I went. More than a few aircraft did land in the English Channel, probably not as ungracefully as I did. But anyway, let's get back to some D-Day facts as we make our way towards the landing beaches. So the D-Day invasion began the pre-dawn hours of June 6, 6:30 in the morning, with thousands of paratroopers landing inland on Utah and Sword beaches in an attempt to cut off exits and destroy bridges to slow Nazi reinforcements. American paratroopers suffered high casualties at Utah Beach, some drowning under heavy equipment in flooded marshland, others shot out of the sky by Nazi snipers. The British and Canadian paratroopers met less resistance at Sword Beach and quickly took two key bridges. D-Day was carried out along 5 sections of beachfront. Operation Overlord was divided into from west to east: Utah, we're landing east to west, Utah, Omaha, Golds, Juneau, and Sword. D-Day was the largest amphibious invasion in military history. According to the D-Day Center, the invasion, officially called Operation Overlord. By the way, D-Day is a common military term meaning the start of an operation, but we tend to refer to D-Day exclusively as Normandy, but other operations were called D-Day as they started out. But this was Operation Overlord. A lot of trickery took place where up near the Calais area with a fake army being built, cardboard airplanes, cardboard trucks, a lot of fake aircraft and troop movements trying to disarm the British. But one of the biggest helps that we had was that the Allied forecasters got the forecast right, clear skies. It had been raining and very cloudy the day before. The German forecasters felt that it was going to be very cloudy and rainy on what turned out to be D-Day, June 6th. But it wasn't, and the Allies got the forecast right and were able to move in, and the rest is history. They carried out a massive deception campaign in advance of D-Day. The idea behind the ruse was to trick the Nazis into thinking that the invasion would occur at Pas de Calais, at that narrow point that I showed you, the closest French coastline to England. The Allies used fake radio transmissions, double agents, and even a phantom army made out of cardboard and wood, commanded by Admiral General Patton. So the Germans also thought General Patton would be leading the invasion. Much to his dismay, Bradley got the call, and he came to the rescue later on in the Ardennes forest as they raced towards inland Germany. Germany had fortified French coastline. Anticipating an Allied invasion somewhere along the French coast, Adolf Hitler charged Field Marshal Erwin Rommel with fortifying Nazi defenses in France. In 1943, Rommel completed the construction of, quote, the Atlantic Wall, Germany's 400 miles line of bunkers, landmines, and beach and water obstacles. It's estimated the Nazis planted 4 million landmines along Normandy's beaches. All right, so let's take a look at the map. I think this is where we're going. Sword. Yes. Don't need that, do we? Yeah, Sword. So over here is Sword Beach. That's the easternmost beach, followed by where the British landed, cut off by the Pegasus Bridge. Then Juneau, where the Canadians landed, and Gold, where the British landed. Now, all these were commanded by the British General Dempsey. Then out to the west, we're going to go towards Omaha Beach, Pointe du Hoc, and then Utah Beach way out here before we head back to RAF Lashenden. You can see we're at about, let's see, 9,500 feet. We're doing, this is in miles per hour. Most aircraft are in knots today. 285 miles per hour, 9,500. Manifold pressure's down around 25. Oil temperature, 100 is a good landmark. You're going to flame out an engine. Whoa, nice cage the attitude indicator. That was bad. Imagine that was done more than once. You were about 95 on the oil temp. So we don't want to do that. Now I'm a little nervous about this, but I think we're getting up close to where the fuel needs to be changed over. I'll wait a little while longer. Maybe as we head back, I'll do it. All right, so right off the nose, this is Sword Beach. It's going to get exciting here, guys. This is a 50-mile stretch of beach. Here's the Allied invasion site. All of France. Sword Beach, Pegasus Bridge back in here. That the British landed here, cut off the Pegasus Bridge. Idea being the paratroopers were dropped all the way behind here. And with gliders and troop carriers. The bombers were hitting the coastline, all the fortifications. The battleships would have been coming, bombing from way out here. All the troop carriers and supply vessels would have been landing, thousands and thousands, 156,000 total during the invasion would have landed. All right, Pegasus Bridge, somewhere up here. I think it's way up here. At the time, way back when, I think that's it right there. It was up here. And the British were tasked with cutting off that, taking control of that area. So they were very successful. Now as we get a little close up, Sword Beach, Juno where the Canadians landed, Sword Beach, British, Juno where the Canadians, Gold Beach, Gold, Juno, Sword. Way out here is Utah with Omaha, and back way up here is Utah, 50-mile stretch. This is very rugged in here. So the Americans were up in this area, British and Canadians here. Dempsey commanded all these troops, and Bradley commanded all those. Now, here we are over, there's the Sword Beach below us, Pegasus Bridge, somewhere out here, guys. Now we're over, coming up over, that's Sword Beach. This is Juno where the Canadians landed. Heading up the shoreline. Of course, we would have been taking anti-aircraft fire through here. They probably would have dropped down. If they were escorting fighters or bombers, they would have been looking for Luftwaffe. If there weren't any, they would have dropped down and engaged any targets, guns they could see. All right, so now we're over Juno. Gold's up here. British landed. Rocky coastline. This is where the American cemetery is. This is Omaha Beach, or up here. Omaha landing zone. Point to Hawk, where the Rangers scaled the wall, seawall, is up here. All the cliffs. And then Utah. So this is where Bradley's troops landed. And paratroopers behind. Now when we head back, we're going to head back all the way across the English Channel going that way. I'm going to try to make it all the way to Omaha without flaming out and then change to the right tank and hope I have enough gas to make it all the way back. There are other fields nearby, but the problem is I don't know where my fuel tank is. I don't know how much fuel I actually have in the aircraft at the moment. Somebody leave a comment, or I should research further to see. So right now there would have been, what did we decide? Some 6,939 ships and vessels, 156,000 Allied troops, 11,590 aircraft total participated between gliders, bombers, fighters, etc. All right, let's go down, get a little lower. Saying let's go down in an aircraft isn't the best choice of phraseology. Let's descend. Get a little closer look. If I zoom in here a little on this, I'll show you something. This is Utah. That little point, that real prominent point, is where Point de Hawk is, where the bomb craters are, which I'll show you. That are still in National Park, where they're still in today, kept intact. You can actually walk down in there. And you can walk into the housing, concrete housing. Some of them were bomb damaged, some were not. All right, I'm getting nervous on the fuel. I think I am going to change this to the right. That was full. I filled up the left and the right. So hopefully that works. Let's get down along the shoreline. We'll descend a little bit. Got the power way back, so we shouldn't overheat anything. That was the other concern, as I mentioned, with these piston aircraft. If you were in a air-to-air battle, maybe with a fighter, Luftwaffe fighter, Messerschmitt, you probably would get that power in, but normally you wouldn't take a chance because you could overheat these engines in a while. Constantly looking for the oil temperature. All right, so we passed Sword, Juno, and Gold. That's the way the British and the Canadians push forward. We're entering the American landing zones, which 2 places in Omaha, 1, and then they scaled the wall. We'll try to take a look at that. Let's get that map out so I know exactly when I'm over. Yeah, exactly when I'm over Point de Hoc. Now we'd be assisting hitting any gun emplacements if the bombers didn't need us. I think we're looking at it right up here, guys. Point de Hoc. Pretty sure. If that's the case, we'll take a look at it. I'll take a little moment and fly you around it. Take a look at it. The American cemetery is off to the left somewhere. No, we got a ways to go. That's not it. It's fairly prominent. I'm looking. It's right there. I marked it prior to the flight. We're down low now. We're down around 1,000 feet. I'm cheating on the map here. That's that point right there. Miles. I think this is it right here below us. Right down there to our left. Let's pull up and take a look at it. Right down there below us. See it? All these bomb holes, bomb craters, and housings. Take another look. I'll fly back over. Take a moment. As I mentioned, they kept it intact, so you could, as memorial. Point de Hoc, flying into the sun. Not the best view. We'll fly right over it here. Right down in here. See it? Right down there. All the bomb craters. Point de Hoc, that's the wall. And now let's head over to, let's get out of max power. We'll burn this engine out. Let's head over to Utah Beach and then we'll bring it on home. Let's get that manifold pressure back around 30. Right about there. All right, so Utah Beach up ahead. Paratroopers would have landed behind here. This was part of Bradley's army. And then we'll head back towards England. As you can imagine, a lot of aircraft didn't make it back to England. They ran out of fuel or they got shot up and had to ditch in the channel. There were naturally a lot of planes there to get them out, but it's a big, big sea. Taking a look in here, we're at 2,000 feet. We're doing around 330 miles per hour. Manifold pressure's 30, that's good, we won't burn it out. Oil temperature is 85, that's good. Fuel. It says pounds, but that's not accurate. It says fuel pounds. Still got 1,800, but I don't know where that is, so I probably need to research that more. All right, coming up on Utah Beach. As I mentioned, the American cemetery is back over near Gold Beach. This is Utah. It really had a lot of resistance down here. As they mentioned, a lot of the men drowned. The British flood. See all that water down there? A lot of the men drowned in that. The British flooded the inland. This is Utah Beach. Okay, without further ado, and so we don't run out of gas, let's head back towards England. Because what they would have done, would hit a thing called bingo fuel. That's the last fuel that they could have left with to make it back to England in decent condition. Long way to go. I hope you enjoyed that. I really enjoyed going over that. For my mom who's watching, my historian mom, I hope I did justice. Yeah, my grandfather. Let's talk about him. I think that's an interesting topic to review on the way home. So he died quite a while ago, but he went over, I think he was 27 years old, and he went over and fought with General Patton's army. He was in the Rhode Island, Connecticut, Massachusetts Guards, all went under Patton's army, amongst others. They were infantry. Landed a few months after D-Day, worked their way up to rescue Bradley's army. They came over from England, where they were waiting after the invasion. Came in and rescued Bradley's army, who was trapped in the Ardennes as the British made their last great push to try to cut off the Belgian ports in the supply that were going to be supplying the troops, trying to cut off the supply lane. It failed, and the rest is history. Get this thing trimmed up as we climb off into the sun here. My grandfather didn't talk much about the war. Just prior to his death, maybe a few years before his death, I had a private conversation. At the time I was an Air Force pilot, and maybe he felt comfortable with me. And he told me that he didn't talk much about it, he said, because a lot of, as he put it, good lads were lost that were the real heroes. And he did not want to be part of any parades or honoring World War II vets when he felt that they fought more bravely than him. I thought it was incredibly humble. He said it was, and he said it was accurate. He felt he could have been much braver. He saw many of his friends and fellow guardsmen die that really were due to their bravery. And he always felt guilty that he came home alive. He had a real tough time with it. Donald Ploss, my mother-in-law's brother, at 18, went over there. Her father really resented General Patton because he felt General Patton had been left behind on the D-Day invasion, let Bradley handle it, and he was trying to be overly aggressive with his troop and sacrificed a lot of his troops to cut off and aggressively save Bradley's army, and then raced to, of course, deeper into Europe. And his son, Donald Ploss, at 18, was killed, and he felt the reputation of General Patton, and I'm not saying I agree with any of this, I don't know enough about it, was he was reckless with his troops. Don't know if any of that's true, guys. That's what he felt. As I mentioned, I am absolutely not a historian. So a lot of crippled airplanes would come across here. They didn't want to ditch in France at that time, so they would actually have to ditch in the channel. Radio, try to get help to pick them up. On the D-Day invasion, let me read this paragraph, it's kind of interesting. In wave after wave, thousands of landing ships, more than 156,000 Allied infantrymen stormed the 5 beaches. Facing them were around 50,000 German troops. Stormy seas made the landings incredibly difficult, with many regiments coming ashore far from their target destinations. At Omaha Beach, only 2 of the 26 amphibious tanks even made it to land. On Omaha Beach, only 2 of the 29 amphibious tanks even made it to land. That takes a minute to think about that. Wow. On their own power. 3 were later transported to the beach. At Utah Beach, the American troops included 14 Comanche code talkers, Native American code talkers, who relayed critical tactical messages in their Native American tongue, which I'm sure was not familiar to the German interpreters. It says here, and I don't know who wrote this, but maybe some disagreement, the toughest fighting was on Omaha Beach. At Omaha Beach, bombing runs had failed to take out the heavily fortified Nazi artillery positions that we just flew over. The first waves of American fighters were cut down in droves by German machine guns as they scrambled across the mine-riddled beach. But when American fighters, those are the ground troops, by the way. But U.S. forces persisted through the day-long slog, pushing forward to a fortified seawall and then up steep bluffs to take out the Nazi artillery post by nightfall. As I mentioned when I did the tour, the Nazis actually took their large cannons and guns and drove them out by truck. So they were never captured, so all that was there was bombed out, some bombed out, in place encampments for the guns. But U.S. forces persisted through the day-long slog. All told, around 2,400 American troops were killed, wounded, or unaccounted for after the fighting at Omaha Beach. Canadians soldiers also suffered terrible casualties at Juno Beach, battling rough seas before laying on a heavily defended strip of shoreline. Similar to the Americans on Omaha Beach, the first lines of the Canadian troops were gunned down en masse by Nazi artillery. Estimates put the initial casualty toll at about 50%. Before pushing beyond the beachfront and chasing the Germans inland, in the end, the Canadians at Juneau captured more towns and territory than any other battalions in Operation Overlord. Let's read that again. I gotta make sure I'm flying the airplane here. I'm trying to climb up, save a little gas. Get a little thinner air. Can't get up too high, as I'm not sure how my supplemental oxygen is, but 12,000 feet certainly is a safe altitude. The first lines of Canadians, I want to read that again. The first lines of Canadians were gunned down en masse by Nazi artillery. Estimates put the initial casualty rate at 50% before pushing beyond the beachfront and chasing the Germans inland. In the end, Canadians at Juneau captured more towns and territory than any other battalions in Operation Overlord. Drifting a little right, let's come left. All 5 beaches, remember June 6, 1944 was the initial invasion at 6:30 a.m. By June 11th, 5 days later, all 5 beaches were secured by the Allied forces. 5 days after the D-Day invasion, troops immediately began installing 2 massive temporary harbors along Normandy beaches that had taken 6 months to construct back in England. So they constructed them in England, moved them on over, and put 2 giant harbors. All told, the Allies unloaded approximately 2.5 million men, 500,000 vehicles, and 4 million tons of supplies at the temporary harbors over the remaining course of the war. The D-Day invasion marked a turning point in the war. The total Allied losses at Normandy are estimated to be at least 4,413. Total Allied casualties in the Battle of Normandy, which dragged on until August, topped 226,000. Let's go back over that. The total Allied losses at Normandy, on the beaches we just explored, are estimated to be at least 4,413. However, total Allied casualties in the Battle of Normandy, which dragged on until August, topped 226,000. But thanks in part to the massive influx of troops and equipment, D-Day marked a decisive turning point in the war. Less than a year later, on May 7, 1945, Germany signed an unconditional surrender. Less than a year later after the Allied invasion. Hope you're enjoying this, and I do apologize for not being more of a historian, but I found a lot of this fascinating as I read it. Now that I brought climbing up, I actually probably need a little bit more left rudder. A couple more facts. Operation Overlord, let me get this map updated here. By now we'd be coming back with a lot of paratroop carriers, escorting them back. probably bombers, fighters. Operation Overlord opened the long-awaited second front against Germany. Of course, the Russian front was the Eastern Front. The defeat of Germany was acknowledged as the Western Allies' principal war aim was as early as December 1941. Opening a second front would relieve pressure on the Soviet Union in the East, and the liberation of France would weaken Germany's overall position in Western Europe. The invasion, if successful, would drain German resources and block access to key military sites. Securing a bridgehead in Normandy, bridgehead from England and from the Americas, would allow the Allies to establish a viable presence in Northern Europe for the first time since the Allied evacuation from Dunkirk in 1940. It's an incredibly powerful story. I actually hate that story and love it at the same time, with the British civilians mobilizing. Man, that gets me every time. Here's some interesting things. D-Day required detailed planning. Lieutenant General Frederick Morgan and his team of British, American, and Canadian officers submitted plans for the invasion in July 1943, so a little under 2 years prior. Not a year prior, 1 year prior. Although limited planning for an invasion of Europe began soon after the evacuation of Dunkirk in 1940, detailed preparation for Operation Overlord did not begin until after the Turin Conference in late 1943. So after we evacuated Dunkirk in 1940, some plans began for the return began, but detailed preparation did not begin until after the Tehran Conference in late 1943. June 6, 1944 was the D-Day. A command team led by General Dwight D. Eisenhower was formed in 1943 to plan the naval, air, and land operations. Deceptive campaigns were developed to draw German attention and strength away from Normandy. To build up resources for the invasion, British factories increased production, and in the first half of 1944, approximately 9 million tons of supplies and equipment crossed the Atlantic from North America to Britain. A substantial Canadian force had been building up in Britain since December 1939. Over 1.4 million American servicemen arrived during 1943 and 1944 to take part in the landings. The long-awaited arrival of my country. D-Day was an international effort. You can start to see the coast of England up here. I'm sure that was a welcome sight for the returning fighters. Let's take a look inside before I blab on anymore. We want to check oil temperature is good. Fuel, it still says we have half a tank. But the key is we only have it left and right main. So I want to make sure. Oh, this stopped working. That's going to be a problem. Now that's funny. That's funny. I can no longer look around. So we are stuck on the view. I'm not going to be able to do the... Let's take a look down further. I'm not going to be able to switch tanks. That's not good, guys. There it is. All right, I can get there. Woohoo! Well, we're getting a little bit off course, aren't we? All right, let's come back to the main view. I'm really enjoying this. I hope you are too. Can't wait to show my mom. Yeah, my mom likes me. Okay, so here we go. So, while we're going along here, not a historian, not a tail dragger pilot, not a P-51 pilot. I am an airline pilot. As I mentioned, trained in the Air Force, went to the Air Force Academy, graduated in 1980. Spent 7 years in the Air Force flying KC-135s out of Plattsburgh, New York. T-37 instructor for pilot training out of Vance. T-37 instructor trainer, trained instructors down in San Antonio. And I've been based in New York with American Airlines for 36 years. I retired at age 65 in September. Not to make it about me, but I have type ratings in the T-37, T-38, KC-135, which is a Boeing 707. Not only that, I'm a big Boeing guy. I've got the 737 type rating, 2,000 hours as a captain, 757 and 767, 6,000 hours as a captain, 777, 2,500 hours as a captain, MD-11, 2,200 hours as a first officer, Super 80, 2,400 hours as a captain and check airman. And then lastly, the A310, which we flew as the A300-600 type rating, around 5,000 hours on that. So about 20,000 hours total. It's been a great career. I'm looking forward to not driving to the airport, though. All right, here we go. D-Day was an international effort. D-Day required unprecedented cooperation between international armed forces. The Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, which is SHAEF, S-H-A-E-F, was an international coalition, and although allies were united against Germany, the military leadership responsible for Overlord had to overcome political, cultural, and personal tensions. You can imagine. Only human, right? By 1944, over 2 million troops from over 12 countries were in Britain, preparing for the invasion. On D-Day, Allied forces consisted primarily of American, British, and Canadian troops, but also included Australian, Belgian, Czech, Dutch, French, Greek, New Zealand, Norwegian, Rhodesian, and Polish naval, air, or ground support. Pretty cool. I used to go visit when I was on London layovers back in the 80s and 90s, the Polish Officers Club. It's still there. Well, here's an interesting sight. That's an airliner flying over. Wouldn't have seen that in the day. They were World War II veterans at that time. They're all probably passed away by now. And we would go in and they would tell us stories. They were the Polish Air Force that escaped Poland after the Nazi invasion and went to England and later returned as fighter pilots. Of course, there were a lot of volunteers from a lot of different countries that did that. The invasion was conducted in 2 main phases, an airborne assault and amphibious landings. Airborne assaults were primarily behind enemy lines and were largely, ultimately successful, but scattered initially, right? We all know that story. Shortly after midnight on June 6th, remember the troops hit the beaches at 6:30, but after midnight on June 6th, over 18,000 Allied paratroopers were dropped into the invasion area to provide tactical support for infantry divisions on the beaches. Allied air forces flew over 14,000 sorties in support of the landings, and having secured air supremacy prior to the invasion, many of these flights were unchallenged by the Luftwaffe. Nearly 7,000 naval vessels, including battleships, destroyers, minesweepers, escort, hovercraft, took part in Operation Neptune. Just full disclosure here, my computer appears to be glitching. Hopefully we make it in. Probably not an uncommon thing. Not computer, but not making it back. Let's take a look where we are. Obviously, it's the coast of England. We would have felt safe from the Luftwaffe by now. And here's a RAF Lashenden. It's not RAF anymore, but remember, it's only a 4,000-foot runway, grass strip. And I'm not a tail dragger expert, so we'll try to figure this out. Naval forces are responsible for escorting. Oh, wait a minute. Operation Neptune was the naval component of Operation Overlord. The naval component was Operation Neptune. Naval forces were responsible for escorting and landing over 132,000 ground troops on the beaches. They also carried out bombardments on German coastal defenses before and during the landings and provided artillery support for the invading troops. German defenses in Normandy were varied in effectiveness. Germany tried to defend the northern coast of France with a series of fortifications, as we mentioned before, known as the Atlantic Wall. However, German defenses were often incomplete and insufficiently manned. Members of the French Resistance and British Special Operations Executive, which is SOE, provided intelligence and helped weaken defenses through sabotage. The Allied deception campaign succeeded in convincing the Germans as late as July 1944 that the main invasion force would still, even after D-Day, land elsewhere. The threat of this larger second invasion kept German reinforcements tied down away from Normandy. That's why Patton was late. They were watching Patton over there with German reconnaissance. Defense also suffered from the complex and often confused command structure of the German army, as well as the constant interference of Adolf Hitler and military matters. However, Allies faced a number of setbacks both on June 6th and the months that followed. For instance, on D-Day, the Americans came close to defeat on Omaha, partly because the preliminary air and naval bombardment failed to knock out the strong defense points, but also because they faced highly effective German troops who had gained hard-earned experience on the Eastern Front against Russia. Throughout the Battle of Normandy, the technical superiority of their tanks, German tanks, and anti-tank weapons, as well as the tactical skill of their commanders, gave German forces an advantage over the Allies. However, the Germans were never able to fully exploit their successes or the weakness of the Allies in a decisive way. D-Day was also possible because of Allied efforts elsewhere. D-Day was made possible because of Allied efforts across all fronts, both before and after June 1944. Let me turn a little bit up here, checking it out. All right, we're going to fly inland now to try to find that little grass strip, which may be the most challenging part of this entire mission, guys. The Allied strategic bombing campaign, which began in 1942, 2 years before D-Day, weakened German industry and forced Germany to commit manpower and resources away from Normandy to home defense. Securing air superiority allowed the Allies to carry out aerial reconnaissance, giving them vital intelligence on German coastal defenses prior to D-Day. D-Day also depended on the Atlantic. Allied control of the Atlantic, which was finally achieved in 1943 through victory in the Battle of the Atlantic. I just did a little video, which I didn't publish because I didn't think it was that good, on Iceland, and I studied Iceland because my daughters are going on vacation there. And I did a little tour around the island. As I mentioned, it didn't come out as good as I wanted, so I didn't publish it, but I learned that Iceland obviously was a very Keflavik, very important strategic, the Germans' location during the Battle of the Atlantic, as the Germans controlled it early on, and the British Expeditionary Force eventually landed there and retook the island because they were using that to service their U-boats, fuel their U-boats, which were attacking the Navy, the Allied resupply ships as they moved over to Europe, the U-boats. The campaign in Italy also, remember the campaign in Russia, Italy, and now France, directed German troops away from the Western and Eastern fronts. The Soviet Belarusian offensive, which Operation Bagration, was launched just after Overlord and destroyed the entire German Army center group. It also kept German forces tied down in the east. This is fascinating. 10 weeks after D-Day, the Allies launched the second invasion on the southern coast of France and began a simultaneous advance towards Germany. There's more to Normandy than D-Day. The importance of D-Day often overshadows the overall significance of the entire Normandy campaign. Establishing a bridgehead was critical, we'll give them that, they said, but it was just the first step. In the 3 months after D-Day, that's when my grandfather actually came over from England with Patton's army, the Allies launched a series of additional offensives to try and advance further inland. These operations varied in success, and the Allies faced strong and determined German resistance. Particularly the Normandy landscape, with all the flooded areas, sunken lanes, bordered by high hedgerows, was difficult to penetrate and placed the advantage with the German defenders. They actually flooded a lot of the areas. By the end of 1944, Overlord did not bring an end to the war in Europe, but it did bring the process through which victory was eventually achieved. By the end of 1944, the German army was in full retreat from France, and by September, Allied momentum had slowed. The Germans were able to regroup and launch the failed but determined counteroffensive in the Ardennes in 1944. That's where my Bradley's army was trapped. As I mentioned, my father and my mother-in-law's brother, my uncle-in-law, came in to rescue. My grandfather survived. My uncle did not. Anyway, you know what I need to do? I need to start paying attention, because the hardest part of this mission may be finding that little grass strip that is no longer a military installation and landing. let's take a look at this map. You see this little inlet. I would guess that's this little inlet. Let's go down here and take a little look. We're going to have to get down to see this bad girl. We're looking for Lashenden. I apologize if I've said anything to offend anybody. I don't consider Germans Nazis, so saying Nazis is not Germans. Great allies of ours, great friends. It's hard to talk about it in today's terms, as we all know. All right, let's get down low and see which one of these is Lashenden. Let's take a look at this one. See if we can't find this bad boy. I don't know, guys. I am trying to figure this out. One of these is a little grass strip. It's not helping me much, is it? Not going to tell me who you are? Overbrook? Oh, there it is, right down there. So now, GPS tracking, turn around. I think it's this little field. Oh, no. Too cool. Trying to find the place to land. I must be down here. We get some gear down. See if we can put this bad boy down somewhere. heard airstrip somewhere. Old Hay Airfield. Pretty cool. Kind of dark out here. You know what I think I'm going to have to do? Let's have a little fun here. EGKH. It's down here somewhere. Let's go back to little nav maps. It's right down here. It is down here somewhere. Let's put some gear down. Start turning it around. I'm going to land anywhere. Don't need the checklist, do we, guys? I think we're here. Let's park the brakes. That's what this says, right? Slowing it up. Yeah. Let's look at little nav map. Yeah, we're on the runway. Holy cow. Want to look around here? Let's take a look around. That was so cool. I would hope I would have done better than that. Put the flaps up. This is where the RAF field used to be. That was not easy to find, guys. Flaps up. Let's go in the cockpit. Ever do this? It won't let me do it. Kind of wanted to look around. Let's open the window. Yeah, well. Anyway, hope you enjoyed that. This is Father Time. It's the airfield. Lord only knows how we found it, but we did. Welcome back to RAF Lashenden. Beers on me. Father Time is out. Special tribute to my grandfather.